You boys be quiet down there!
It's a time of Sengoku. It's about the weak becoming the victims of the strong. You know, that kind of stuff. A princess looked into the future and predicted everything. A strong soldier would appear. The princess called to the soldier with her whole spirit.
But I'm using my whole ass.
Aw snap, it's Sengoku 2. By the way, you don't get any intro story at all if you're running this game on an MVS. It just jumps straight to the title sequence. Also, only the MVS has this alternate title screen, which is only shown after adding a credit. This time we're looking at NGH-040 Sengoku 2 from SNK, also known as Sengoku Densyo 2. You can tell we're really starting to move forward in the timeline, because this one was released in February 1993. Just like King of the Monsters 2 covered in the last video, Sengoku 2 is 74 megs. We'll be looking at it on my MVS cart here. In Sengoku 1, a warlord from the past came to the present. This time around, the Dark Shogun in the Sengoku era is waking up samurai souls and sending them throughout different eras in time. Wonder where they got that idea from. A princess reaches out to the present and calls two warriors of light for help. Take control of Claude Yamamoto or Jack Stone. The manual actually gives us a brief background on both protagonists. Jack is an arm wrestling champion and intellectual who has studied Western martial arts. Claude was trained in Asian martial arts until age 6. He rarely smiles because his uncle died and he was raised by his grandparents. Unlike the first Sengoku, which took our heroes on a journey between our world, the underworld, and the heavens in each stage, Sengoku 2 will take them on a journey through time. The first 3 stages each take place in a different era, and there are only 4 stages. Just like in the first game, the stages jump between reality and fantasy, warping our heroes between different scenes. It usually takes just under 40 minutes to complete the game, so the 4 stages are a decent length. There's a rumor that 2 stages were removed from this game because they contained religious imagery. If true, it would potentially mean a huge amount of additional content missing from the final game. I wouldn't mind an additional 2 stages. The game's lively journey through time is over all too soon, even though the clear time of 40 minutes is already longer than the typical 30 minutes of earlier belt scrollers on the Neo Geo. Perhaps someone could try mining the game's ROM data for evidence of the cut stages. Let's get started. You have 2 attack buttons. The A button is your upper slash, and the B button is what's known as a horizontal slash. This attack is generally lowered to the ground. Press C to jump. D is your character change button, so just like in the first outing, you can switch between your stock of companion characters. You can also press A and B together to block, which can be useful not only for defending, but also for deflecting projectiles back toward certain opponents. If you hold A, B, and C together for a moment and then release, you can do a special trick, which is unlimited and extremely useful for conquering the more difficult opponents in the game. Playing well in this game means using this special whenever you can. In the first game, your warrior companions were the dog, samurai, and ninja. This time around, it's the same, but the samurai has been swapped out for a tengu, a supernatural being from Japanese folklore. Also, the companion characters have names in this one. The ninja's name is Mike Walsh. The character movesets are larger in the sequel, with 2 attack buttons, compared to only 1 attack button in the first game, but Sengoku 2 still lacks combos and chaining moves together. The dog is similar to in the first game, with the spinning jump attack, but it's thankfully much easier to hit enemies with the normal standing attack. The ninja is fast, with a short attack range, but he can get shurikens by collecting power-ups. The tengu is slow, but has the most powerful base attack. Unlike in the first game, you no longer need to collect your spirit companions. You have all 3 of them from the start. You have a 60-second time limit to use each, and the time is refilled whenever you lose a life. You really don't have to switch to the other characters throughout most of the game if you don't want to. but you'll find that with repeated playthroughs, the different characters can be called upon for varying strategies at specific points in the game. The enemies in this game sure like to block attacks, so your timing and method of attack matter. Similar to in the first game, you collect orbs for power-ups, but they've made some changes. In the first game, your characters started empty-handed, and some orbs would give you swords. But in Sengoku 2, your main characters are armed with swords all the time. So now the red and blue orbs instead expand your attack range, and the yellow orb provides a one-time mass destruction attack that damages all enemies on screen when you press the button. Here in the sequel, it really is a boon that, unlike in the first game, you have a sword from the get-go. This was not always planned to be the case. In earlier prototype screenshots of this game, you can see the characters fighting empty-handed without swords, which never happens in the final released version. In the first area, the princess has called our heroes back to 1570X in the Warring States period of feudal Japan. This is the period that the Dark Shogun hails from. The boss battle takes place on the back of a flying dragon. The second boss phase is a Shitenno, one of the 4 heavenly king statues that protects Buddhist temples. Between stages, we're taunted by cutscenes of the Dark Shogun sending our heroes to a different time period. For Area 2, he sends them to 1940X during World War II. Sengoku 2 has 3 of these horseback sections, one for each stage except for the first. You can't transform to the other characters in these scenes, and the controls are pretty simple. Press A to swing your sword in front of you, and B to attack characters approaching from behind. These play almost more like quick bonus stages, where the goal is to defeat as many of the enemies as possible before they're gone, though of course you can take damage. These quick horse riding parts do a great job of breaking up the action and providing variety. By the way, this next scene on top of the plane reminds me a lot of this part in NAM 1975. The boss is a 9-tailed fox from Folklore. There's an example of some bad English in the next cutscene, where the Dark Lord says, "You have tangled with me. I will definitely kill you." Perhaps something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have tangled with me," or "You'll regret tangling with me," would be less awkward. The dialogue seems made up for the English version, because the Japanese is more like, "You, how dare you get in my way, I won't forgive you." The third area is 1990X, the Age of Upheavals, which was meant to be the modern era when this game was new. There's a mid-boss here which is another Shitenno, like the first stage boss. Both of these Shitenno bosses can be defeated by deflecting their shots back at them. Area 3 closes with a boss battle on a rather nice boat scene, complete with a water dragon. Now, eventually the Dark Shogun just gets pissed and says, "Screw it, bring those guys to me," and so the final stage in his floating castle begins. Actually, you know who this guy is like? The very end boss is really no problem at all. Just stay close in and dodge the attacks that can reach you from there. Would it kill you to drop us off at home? We don't live in Mixed Bar, you know. Yeah, I live in Kentucky, actually. Wait, all that stuff we did in the past screwed up the present. Don't leave me here. Super Nintendo, eat your heart out. The same stretch effect from the cutscenes is used for these ugly, hard-to-read scaling credits against a background layer. Bigger, badder, better. There's a special ending with a bow if you can manage to do a perfect run of this game on the hardest difficulty. The credits for Sengoku 2 are mostly unknown. The producer and director are both using pseudonyms, and it isn't known who these actually are, so we only know for sure that they each worked on at least a handful of other early SNK games. If you haven't noticed by now, the graphics in Sengoku 2 are gorgeous, and a really big step up from the first game. From the animation, character design, to the backgrounds, all are peak early 90s SNK pixel art. This is a team of designers at the top of their game. Sengoku 2 sure is easy on the eyes throughout. Similar to in the first game, the bosses have short voiced speeches when they appear, and also for when they're defeated. Not much change there from in the original. The soundtrack by Tate Norio is again full of variety like the first game, blending traditional Japanese styles with modern rock and orchestral influences. The heavy use of timpani and hard cymbal strikes provide more energy and excitement in the sequel. The main stage songs generally play for longer without interruption in this outing, and have a longer runtime for this reason. If I had to listen to the soundtrack from either of the Sengoku games, I'd pick Sengoku 2 all day. The somewhat annoying chanting tracks from the first game are thankfully missing here, the weird chanting reserved for the scene transitions only. I mentioned in the Sengoku 1 video that some of the music is like Proto-Samurai Showdown music, and the same can be true here in the sequel. I also appreciate that this game has that stereo effect, where the sound effects are panned to the left or right channel when an action is taking place on the side of the screen. The English home cartridge of Sengoku 2 was a very limited release. If you're looking to buy any version of Sengoku 2 these days, even the Japanese home cartridge is fairly rare and not very cheap to buy now. In fact, Sengoku 2 is not easy to find on MVS either. As with King of the Monsters 2 and Baseball Stars 2, the logo for Sengoku 2 seems to have originally been with a Roman numeral, but they updated the final logo before release. 1993's Sengoku 2 marks the last side-scrolling beat-em-up we'll be covering on Neo Geo Generation for a very long time. There wasn't another brawler released for Neo Geo until NGH-040 Noise Factory's Sengoku 3 in 2001, a game that bears little resemblance to the first two games in the series. I hope you like one-on-one fighting games, because that's obviously what we're going to be seeing a lot more of as we move forward through the Neo Geo's library. Unlike the first Sengoku, Sengoku 2 didn't have any contemporary ports to consoles other than the Neo Geo. So let's go ahead then and take a look at the Neo Geo CD version. We are getting into somewhat larger games now, so we're not going to get away with just one load at the beginning. The reason the initial load takes 54 seconds on a single speed system and 33 seconds on a CDZ is because the game is already loading up this first game demo sequence. The laugh voice is missing from the opening in the Neo Geo CD version. Now let's press start and we get a difficulty select, how to play screen, followed by a load screen for the opening cutscene, taking 10 seconds on a single speed system. After the cutscene, the game then spends 14 seconds loading again before the first stage. It continues like this with 2 loading screens between each stage throughout the game, and one final load before the end credits. It's a lot, but it really doesn't hurt the experience because the game is divided into only 4 lengthy stages. More detrimental to the experience in the CD version is the pauses to wait for the drive to access the music between scenes. There's a pause before these warp sequences each time, and these happen frequently, so it's somewhat disruptive to the flow of the game. The chanting voice for the warp sequence is on a CD audio track, so the game waits to access this before proceeding. But then after the warp, the game fortunately proceeds without waiting for the next area's music to begin. There are some scenes in the game that can take a while to play through, so for these parts, it's likely the CD music track won't be long enough, and you'll hear a gap in the music during gameplay as the track loops, which was typical of CD games of that era. Aside from that laugh on the high score screen, all of the voices during the game from the cartridge version are here, and they're stored in memory, which means they get loaded in during those load screens. This game does that weird thing a few Neo Geo CD games do, where the screen goes completely black when the game is paused, even though the cartridge version doesn't do this. The CD version of Sengoku 2 does not include an arranged soundtrack, unfortunately. It's just recordings of music from the cartridge game. But that's going to be changing in the games ahead that we'll be covering soon. Overall, there's nothing game-breaking here to warrant passing on the CD version. The load screens and pauses are nothing outside of the norm for Neo Geo CD. Sengoku 2 generally received positive reviews, and there was a time when Sengoku 2's reputation among fans was unimpeachable. But the game's stock seems to have fallen over time, and it's not exactly clear why. Perhaps there's a lack of variety and challenge in this one. When credit feeding the game, enemies are defeated quite easily with basic attacks, leaving little incentive to switch characters, so perhaps the gameplay feels a bit empty upon repeat play sessions. That is, if you're not keen to try changing things up and improving. It is true that SNK doesn't have the greatest track record when it comes to brawlers or beat-em-ups, but Sengoku 2 is without a doubt a good one. The attention-grabbing, expertly designed enemies and scenery, along with the vast gameplay zipping around through time, make a casual two-player session feel like a non-stop party. When it comes to the sheer fun of arcade-style beat-em-ups with a friend, you can't do much better than this. I'll take Sengoku 2 over the slower-paced first one any day of the week. Thank you for watching another episode of Neo Geo Generation. Next time we'll be looking at NGH-041, Baseball Stars 2, another one of the most beloved sports games on the Neo Geo. So please join me next time. Until then, go play some Neo Geo. This is Neo Alec signing off.